America's power grid is on the brink. Outdated, overworked, and no match for record demand or extreme weather. Rolling blackouts, grid failures, entire states in darkness. It's not if, but when. Today we're counting down the 10 states most at risk of blackouts in 2025. From aging infrastructure to surging energy demand, these states are walking a fine line. Some will shock you. Don't get left in the dark. Hit subscribe and stay powered up. 10. Nevada. Nevada, the silver state, is teetering on the edge of a power crisis. Over the past decade, the state has seen a surge in electricity demand, driven by a booming population, the rise of energy-intensive data centers, and the explosion of cryptocurrency mining operations. While Las Vegas dazzles with its neon lights and 24/7 energy consumption, the grid behind the scenes is straining under the weight of this growth. The majority of Nevada's power comes from aging natural gas and coal plants, many of which are nearing the end of their operational lives. While the state has made significant strides in renewable energy, particularly solar, there's a glaring issue: solar panels don't work when the sun goes down. Nevada's battery storage capacity, which is critical for storing solar energy for nighttime use, is far from sufficient to meet the state's needs. This creates a dangerous gap during peak demand hours, especially when desert temperatures soar into the triple digits and air conditioners are running full blast. Adding to the problem is Nevada's heavy reliance on imported electricity from neighboring states. This dependency makes the state vulnerable to transmission line failures or regional heat waves that increase demand across multiple states. A single transmission line outage could leave large portions of Nevada in the dark. Efforts to modernize the grid are underway, but progress is slow, bogged down by bureaucratic red tape and high costs. While Las Vegas casinos and resorts have backup generators to keep the lights on, the rest of the state isn't so lucky. For many Nevadans, every summer feels like a roll of the dice, with the odds of a blackout growing higher each year. 9. Arizona. If Nevada is on the brink, Arizona is already feeling the heat, literally. Known for its scorching temperatures, Arizona's power grid is under immense pressure to keep up with the state's rapid growth. Cities like Phoenix and Tucson are expanding at breakneck speed, and their insatiable appetite for electricity is pushing the grid to its limits. Air conditioning in Arizona isn't just a convenience, it's a necessity for survival. The state has embraced solar power as a renewable energy solution, but this comes with its own set of challenges. Solar energy production peaks during the day, but demand often spikes in the evening when people return home and crank up their AC units. This mismatch, known as the duck curve, creates a logistical nightmare for grid operators who struggle to balance supply and demand. Arizona's utilities are racing to build battery storage facilities and peaker plants to address this issue, but they're constantly playing catch-up. Meanwhile, the state's water crisis adds another layer of complexity. Many of Arizona's power plants rely on water for cooling, but with the Colorado River drying up and groundwater levels dropping, some plants may be forced to shut down during critical heat waves. The state's aging transmission infrastructure is another weak link. High-voltage lines that crisscross the desert are exposed to extreme heat, dust storms, and monsoons, all of which can cause significant damage. A single transmission line failure during peak summer demand could plunge entire cities into darkness. Arizona's sunny weather may be its claim to fame, but without significant upgrades to its power grid, the state could be facing a very dark future. 8. New Mexico. New Mexico, the land of enchantment, is grappling with a power grid that's anything but magical. The state's energy infrastructure is outdated and fragile, resembling an old pickup truck that works most of the time but is prone to breaking down when you need it most. The state relies heavily on aging natural gas and coal plants, many of which are nearing the end of their operational lives. Rural areas are particularly vulnerable, as transmission lines stretch across vast distances with minimal redundancy. This means that a single equipment failure or severe weather event can knock out power to thousands of customers for days. New Mexico's mountainous terrain adds to the challenge. When winter storms or summer monsoons hit, repairing damaged transmission lines becomes a logistical nightmare. Entire regions can be left without power, with no quick fix in sight. The state is also facing increased energy demand from oil and gas operations in the Permian Basin. These fracking operations and processing facilities consume massive amounts of electricity, further straining an already fragile grid. Utilities are caught in a difficult position, trying to balance the needs of traditional customers with the voracious appetite of the energy industry. While renewable energy development is underway, progress is slow and uneven. Wind farms in the eastern part of the state generate power when the wind blows, but there's limited transmission capacity to deliver that energy to major population centers. Solar installations are growing, but without adequate storage solutions, they're not much help during nighttime or stormy conditions. New Mexico's power grid is a ticking time bomb, and without significant investment and modernization, the state could be facing frequent and prolonged blackouts. 7. Utah. Utah, the beehive state, is buzzing with growth, but that growth is putting immense pressure on its power grid. The state's population is booming, data centers are multiplying, and manufacturing is on the rise, all of which translate to skyrocketing electricity demand. Utah's energy system is heavily reliant on coal, which has long been a stable source of power. However, many of the state's coal plants are scheduled for retirement in the coming years due to environmental regulations and economic pressures. The state is scrambling to replace this baseload power with natural gas and renewables, but the transition isn't happening fast enough to keep up with demand. Winter poses a unique challenge for Utah. When temperatures plummet, electricity demand spikes as residents turn up their heating system. This creates a conflict, as gas-fired power plants compete with residential heating for the same fuel supply. During polar vortex events, which are becoming more frequent, the grid is pushed to its breaking point. Utah's mountainous geography further complicates matters. Transmission lines must cross rugged terrain, making them vulnerable to winter storms, high winds, and equipment failures. When lines go down in remote areas, repairs can take days or even weeks, leaving entire communities in the dark. The state is investing in renewable energy, particularly wind and solar, but these sources are intermittent and require significant battery storage to be reliable. Unfortunately, Utah's storage infrastructure is still years away from being adequate. As Utah continues to grow, its power grid is struggling to keep pace. Without major upgrades and investments, the state could be facing a future where blackouts become a regular occurrence. 6. Wyoming. Wyoming, the cowboy state, is a paradox when it comes to energy. It's one of the nation's largest energy producers, generating massive amounts of electricity from coal, natural gas, and wind. Yet, despite exporting power to multiple states, Wyoming's own grid is fragile and outdated, leaving its residents vulnerable to blackouts. The state's energy infrastructure was originally designed to support mining operations and small, scattered communities, not the demands of a modern, interconnected economy. Winter in Wyoming is unforgiving, with blizzards, ice storms, and sub-zero temperatures regularly wreaking havoc on the grid. Power lines snap under the weight of ice, and equipment failures are common in the extreme cold. The state's rural nature compounds the problem. Many communities rely on single transmission lines, creating critical points of failure. When these lines go down, it can take hours or even days for repair crews to reach the affected areas, especially in remote regions where harsh weather and rugged terrain make access difficult. Wind energy has become a major player in Wyoming's energy portfolio, but it brings its own set of challenges. Wind power is inherently unpredictable. When the wind dies down, utilities must quickly ramp up other energy sources to fill the gap. Conversely, when the wind is strong, the grid can become overwhelmed by sudden surges in power generation. This constant balancing act puts additional strain on grid operators who are already dealing with aging infrastructure. The state's high-voltage transmission lines, many of which were built in the 1970s and 80s, are nearing the end of their operational life. Replacing these lines across Wyoming's vast open spaces is a monumental and expensive task. A single major transmission failure during a winter storm could leave entire regions without power for weeks, plunging the cowboy state into darkness. Despite its energy-rich reputation, Wyoming's grid is a ticking time bomb, and without significant investment, the state's residents could find themselves in the dark more often than they'd like. 5. Montana. Montana, known as Big Sky Country, faces big challenges when it comes to keeping the lights on. The state's power grid is a patchwork of systems with various utilities serving small, scattered communities across a vast geographic area. This decentralized setup, combined with aging infrastructure, makes Montana's grid particularly vulnerable to failures. Mining operations are a major driver of electricity demand in Montana. Copper mines, coal facilities, and even data centers are consuming power at an unprecedented rate, leaving utilities scrambling to keep up. Grid operators are constantly walking a tightrope, trying to balance supply and demand without tipping into a crisis. Montana's weather is another formidable adversary. The state is no stranger to extreme conditions, from ice storms that coat power lines until they collapse under the weight, to wildfires that destroy transmission towers and substations. Summer thunderstorms bring microbursts and tornadoes capable of flattening entire sections of the grid in minutes. Winter, meanwhile, delivers blizzards that bury equipment under feet of snow and ice, making repairs a logistical nightmare. The rural nature of Montana exacerbates these issues. When power goes out in remote areas, it can take days just to locate the problem, let alone fix it. Many communities rely on outdated equipment that should have been replaced decades ago, but the sparse population makes large-scale infrastructure investments financially challenging. Hydroelectric power, once a reliable backbone of Montana's energy system, is becoming less dependable. Drought conditions and shifting precipitation patterns are reducing water levels, forcing hydro plants to cut back on generation just when demand is peaking. What was once considered a stable, clean energy source is now subject to the whims of climate change, leaving Montana's grid operators with fewer options. Montana's power grid is a fragile system stretched across a massive landscape, and its vulnerabilities are becoming increasingly apparent. Without significant upgrades and a more robust approach to renewable energy and storage, Big Sky country could find itself in the dark more often than it would like. 4. Colorado. Colorado, the Centennial State, is experiencing a power grid crisis as its population and economy grow at an unprecedented pace. Cities like Denver and Boulder are booming, attracting tech companies, data centers, and new residents. This rapid growth has led to a surge in electricity demand, leaving utilities scrambling to expand generation and transmission capacity. However, they're constantly playing catch-up, and the grid is struggling to keep pace. Colorado's geography presents unique challenges for its power infrastructure. The majority of the state's population lives along the Front Range, separated from key energy resources by the Rocky Mountains. Moving electricity from coal plants in the east and renewable energy projects in the plains to urban centers requires an extensive network of transmission lines. These lines are not only expensive to build and maintain, but are also highly vulnerable to weather-related disruptions. Wildfires have become a year-round threat in Colorado, creating a nightmare scenario for utilities. High winds, dry conditions, and aging equipment make power lines a significant fire risk. To prevent catastrophic blazes, utilities are increasingly resorting to preemptive power shutoffs during high-risk weather conditions. While this strategy helps mitigate fire risks, it leaves thousands of customers in the dark, sometimes for days. The state's aggressive push toward renewable energy has introduced new complications. Colorado is phasing out coal plants faster than it can replace them with reliable alternatives. While wind and solar are excellent sources of clean energy, they are inherently intermittent. When the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine, the grid struggles to meet demand. Battery storage is growing, but remains far from sufficient to handle extended periods of calm weather or overcast skies. Winter adds another layer of complexity. Colorado's natural gas infrastructure often struggles during extreme cold snaps, as gas supplies are diverted to heat homes and businesses. This leaves gas-fired power plants with limited fuel, just when electricity demand is at its highest. Colorado's power grid is at a crossroads. State's rapid growth, combined with its geographic and environmental challenges, has created a perfect storm of vulnerability. Without significant investment in infrastructure, storage, and grid modernization, the Centennial State could face a future where blackouts become an all-too-common occurrence. 3. New York. The Empire State's power grid is a precarious balancing act, more fragile than its name suggests. New York's energy demands are immense, with New York City alone consuming more electricity than some entire states. The infrastructure supporting this demand is aging and overburdened, a tangled web of outdated transmission lines, overworked substations, and power plants that have long exceeded their intended lifespans. Summers in New York are particularly brutal for the grid. Heat waves turn the city into an energy pressure cooker, with millions of air conditioners running at full blast. The result? A grid that groans under the strain, teetering on the edge of rolling blackouts. The infamous 2003 blackout, which plunged 50 million people into darkness, serves as a stark reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control. That disaster began with a single equipment failure, which cascaded through an already overloaded system. New York's ambitious climate goals are adding another layer of complexity. The state is aggressively shutting down nuclear and fossil fuel plants in favor of renewable energy sources like offshore wind and solar. While this transition is critical for sustainability, it's a race against time. Building the necessary renewable infrastructure takes years, and the grid must remain operational. In the meantime, unfortunately, solar panels and wind turbines can't generate power on demand, leaving the state vulnerable during peak usage or poor weather conditions. The transmission system connecting upstate power plants to New York City is another weak link. Many of these high-voltage lines were constructed in the mid-20th century and are now operating at maximum capacity. A single failure in this system could trigger widespread outages, leaving millions in the dark. Cybersecurity is an emerging threat that looms large over New York's grid. As the system becomes increasingly digital and interconnected, it becomes a prime target for hackers. A successful cyber attack could cripple the grid, causing outages that last not just hours but potentially weeks or months. For a state as densely populated and economically vital as New York, such a scenario would be catastrophic. New York's power grid is a house of cards, vulnerable to everything from heat waves to cyber attacks. Without significant investment in modernization and storage solutions, the Empire State could face a future where blackouts become an unsettling norm. 2. California. California. The Golden State is grappling with a power grid that's anything but golden. Once a pioneer in renewable energy, California now finds itself at the forefront of grid instability, plagued by rolling blackouts, wildfire-induced shutoffs, and skyrocketing electricity costs. The state's energy challenges are as vast and varied as its landscape, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Wildfires have turned California's power grid into a double-edged sword. Utility equipment has been linked to some of the state's most devastating fires, including the infamous Camp Fire that destroyed the town of Paradise. To avoid further disasters, utilities now preemptively shut off power during high-risk weather conditions. While this strategy reduces fire risks, it leaves millions of Californians in the dark, sometimes for days at a time. The state's aggressive renewable energy mandates have created a new set of challenges. California generates an abundance of solar power during the day, but demand peaks in the evening when the sun goes down. This mismatch, known as the duck curve, forces the state to either waste excess renewable energy or import expensive electricity from neighboring states. Both options strain the grid and drive up costs. California's transmission infrastructure is another weak point. High-voltage lines crisscrossing mountain passes and deserts are constantly under threat from wildfires, extreme weather, and aging equipment. Building new transmission capacity is essential, but environmental regulations and local opposition make these projects incredibly difficult to execute. Energy storage is growing, but it's not yet sufficient to handle extended periods of low renewable generation. When solar and wind power falter, the state has to rely on natural gas plants or imported electricity to fill the gap. This patchwork approach works most of the time, but it leaves the grid increasingly fragile and prone to failures. Winter isn't much kinder to California's grid. Natural gas infrastructure struggles during cold snaps, as supplies are diverted to heat homes and businesses. This leaves gas-fired power plants with limited fuel, just when electricity demand is at its highest. California's power grid is a cautionary tale of ambition outpacing infrastructure. Without massive investments in storage, transmission, and grid modernization, the Golden State risks a future where blackouts are not just a possibility but a regular occurrence. 1. Texas. Texas, the Lone Star State, tops this list for all the wrong reasons. The state's power grid, managed by the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, ERCOT, operates as an isolated system, disconnected from the rest of the country. While this independence was intended to give Texas control over its energy, it has instead created a fragile and isolated grid that struggles to handle extreme conditions. The February 2021 winter storm was a wake-up call for Texas, exposing the grid's vulnerabilities in the most devastating way. Millions of Texans were left without power for days as temperatures plummeted, pipes burst, and homes became uninhabitable. Tragically, lives were lost, and the state's energy system was revealed to be woefully unprepared for extreme weather. While some improvements have been made since then, the fundamental issues remain. Texas operates a deregulated electricity market that prioritizes low costs over reliability. energy companies are incentivized to cut corners rather than invest in resilient infrastructure. This market structure leaves the grid vulnerable during periods of high demand, as there's often insufficient backup power to meet the needs of millions of residents. Summers in Texas are becoming just as dangerous as winters. Heat waves, often lasting weeks, push temperatures well above 100 degrees, causing air conditioning demand to skyrocket. ERCOT frequently issues conservation appeals, essentially asking Texans to use less electricity to avoid blackouts. This is hardly a reassuring strategy for a state with a rapidly growing population and economy. Texas is betting big on renewable energy, particularly wind and solar. While these sources generate significant power, they're also highly variable. Wind power is abundant at night when demand is low, but it often falters during peak daytime hours. Solar energy, while growing, faces the same duck curve problem seen in other states. The state's transmission system is another bottleneck. High-voltage lines connecting West Texas wind farms to urban centers are frequently overloaded. Equipment failures or weather disruptions can ripple across the entire grid, causing widespread outages. Natural gas plants, which provide most of Texas's backup power, are also vulnerable. Freezing temperatures can shut down gas wells and processing facilities, while extreme heat reduces efficiency. When Texans need power the most, these plants often fall short. Texas's energy challenges are compounded by its booming population and economy. Cities like Austin, Dallas, and Houston are growing rapidly, and industries like data centers and cryptocurrency mining are consuming massive amounts of electricity. Yet, ERCOT's market structure makes long-term planning nearly impossible, leaving the state ill-prepared for its future energy needs. Cybersecurity is another looming threat. As Texas's grid becomes more connected, it becomes a prime target for hackers. A successful cyber attack during a heat wave or winter storm could cause catastrophic blackouts, leaving millions without power for weeks. Texas's grid problems are a perfect storm of poor planning, market failures, and extreme weather. Without significant reforms and investments, the Lone Star State risks becoming a cautionary tale of energy independence gone wrong. The looming threat of blackouts across these 10 states paints a sobering picture of America's energy future. From aging infrastructure and extreme weather to surging demand and the challenges of transitioning to renewable energy, each state faces its own unique set of vulnerabilities. Whether it's Texas grappling with its isolated grid, California battling wildfires and the duck curve, or New York struggling with outdated systems and cybersecurity risks, the message is clear: the nation's power grid is under immense strain. These challenges aren't just technical, they're deeply personal. When the lights go out, it's not just an inconvenience. It's a disruption to daily life, a threat to safety, and a reminder of how much we rely on a stable energy supply. The stakes are high, and the consequences of inaction could be catastrophic. But there's hope. Investments in grid modernization, renewable energy storage, and resilient infrastructure can help mitigate these risks. States must act swiftly and decisively, prioritizing long-term solutions over short-term fixes. Collaboration between governments, utilities, and communities will be key to ensuring a reliable energy future. As we look ahead to 2025, the question isn't just which states are most at risk, it's whether we'll rise to the challenge of building a grid that can withstand the demands of a changing world. The time to act is now, before the next blackout becomes a reality.